Okay, we good, Brian?
Yep.
All right. Okay, good evening, everybody. This is meeting 3 of 5 for the Norwalk rezoning charrette that we're doing virtually instead of in person via courtesy of the COVID-19 outbreak. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Steve Kleppen. I'm the Planning and Zoning Director. I'm joined by Brian Bakerson, Principal Planner for the city. Also, Lou Schulman chairs the Zoning Commission is with us. And I will immediately stop talking and kick it over to Brian Wright and Jessica Wilson from TPUDC, who will be leading you through the evening. Thanks.
All right. Thanks so much for coming this evening. So tonight we are going to talk a little bit about development and community character, trying to understand, what are the specifics of your vision for the future? I'm Brian Wright. I'm the principal of Town Planning and Urban Design Collaborative, and Jessica's here with me. So we're leading the consulting team to work on the zoning ordinance update. The format for these meetings, if you haven't been to one yet, is free form. So it's just a discussion. We're really trying to learn from all of you. We've been studying the existing zoning ordinance and your citywide plan, and we've had conversations with a few different stakeholder groups, and we've had interviews, one-on-one interviews with the common council members, and so we have a little bit of a sense of what's going on, but each time we get the opportunity to talk to a group of people, we learn a little bit more, and we also start to understand what are an individual person sort of pet project or pet peeve or concerns versus what sort of the broader community consensus about what the concerns are and things that need to be addressed in the zoning ordinance update as we talk to different people. So we're really going to sit here and chat with you. You may inspire us to share something with you from our work around the country, some thoughts that could be helpful for you as well, but mostly just want to pick your brain. So what do we need to know about community character, about development? Is new development kind of giving you the character that you're looking for? If you're a developer, what kind of challenges do you have in trying to do development in Norwalk as opposed to other nearby communities, et cetera? So maybe we could just go do introductions quickly. We'll start on our screen with Brian Baker.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Baker. I'm the principal planner with City of Norwalk. I'm sorry, I was setting up the interpretation, so I missed what you were saying, Brian. But
oh, that's okay. I was just asking you to introduce yourself. So I'll go into Steve now. Steve Kleppen.
Sure. Steve Kleppen, as I said, Planning and Zoning Director with the city.
All right, Louis.
Lou Schulman, the chair of the Zoning Commission.
Great. Lynn Pratt. You're muted. Still muted.
Sorry, interested resident.
All right. Frank Phillips.
Interested resident.
Okay. And Michael Stein.
Yeah, good evening. Hi, my name is Michael Stein. I'm a resident of Norwalk since 1988, and I have a small architectural practice based in Norwalk for the last 25 years. I have too much experience with the zoning regulations in the town of Norwalk, and am thrilled to hear that we are finally getting to a point where we can redesign these regulations. And I have some very specific ideas that I'd love to share with your consultants and with the planners.
Great, thank you, Michael. Diane.
This Diane?
Yes. All right.
Okay. I don't know if there's lately a lot of Dianes mulling about. Anyway, my name is Diane Loricella. I currently reside in the Cranberry or northeast section of the city, but I have lived in almost every area over the last 35 years. I was much younger when I started. I am a professional environmental consultant. but I also deal with land use planning and help both sides of the issue. So I have also over the next few days some specific additions or changes to the zoning regs. I'm very happy the city has undertaken this. I want to make sure we have an open mind. So thank you.
Great, thanks. At the risk of walking into the light, I'll call on Scott. Unmute.
There we go. Don't go into the light, Carol Ann. Scott Goodwin. I live in East Norwalk, and we bought our house here about 15 years ago because of its proximity to the beach and the train station and I-95. So,
Great, thanks. Lee Grant.
Hi, I live in Silvermine. I'm on the Nash Advisory. We're always interested in what you guys are up to. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And Adam Blank.
Hi, I guess I'm a concerned resident here in Norwalk. I'm also a lawyer representing typically developers on land use applications in Norwalk. And I guess, I think from 07 to 17, around that time period, I served on the zoning commission.
Great, thank you. Lynnell.
Hi, my name's Lynnell Jones. I've lived in Norwalk since 1986. I've owned a variety of properties. I live now on Wilson Point, and my concern is stormwater runoff and low impact development. Thank you very much. I want to just give you guys a shout out. What you did in Portsmouth, New Hampshire was awesome.
Oh, thanks, appreciate it. Next we have Tamara, Shockley.
Tamara Shockley. I am, let me see. My name is Tamara Shockley. I am a planning commissioner, but I'm here tonight as a interested resident. And I'm interested in hearing what you're going to do in your plans about specific neighborhoods and the changing demographics, and how you plan to meet the interests of the two changing demographics here in Norwalk.
Great. Heather. Done.
I have a weird light thing too. I am the president of the Silvermine Neighborhood Association, and we're very interested in maintaining a lot of the historic, old Connecticut. We have a lot of beautiful old stone walls and beautiful old buildings, and so that's a big, focus for our neighborhood.
All right. And the origami artist, Robert Pratt.
Yeah, hi. I'm just a concerned resident, really concerned about how certain buildings, residential buildings, are getting approved that seem to be really out of character with the neighborhoods and out of proportion with the lots that they're on, among other things, in terms of the future of the city and the environmental changes that are happening that we have to account for.
Awesome. Did you fold that yourself?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Did you fold that as a unicorn yourself?
Oh, no, that was just an art thing. And I grabbed it and took a photo with it, but thanks.
Okay. Christine. China. Don't seem to be muted, but we can't hear you.
The interpreter.
Oh, interpreter, okay. Jean.
Hi, I'm Dean Tiernon. I've been an East Norwalk resident about 25 years, close to 25 years, and I'm just an interested neighbor to see how this process goes.
Great. Lauren Henry.
Hi, I've lived in Norwalk for about 20 years, and like Jean said, I'm just interested in hearing how this process is going to go about.
Okay, and Dana. You're muted.
Okay. Dana Laird, Chair of the Historical Commission. Just trying to figure out how we can make Norwalk a better place for our residents.
Great, thank you. All right, so anybody who hasn't already but wants to, feel free to share your camera so we can see your smiling faces, but if you prefer not to, that's okay as well. All right, so I heard several of you say you were concerned residents rather than excited or enthusiastic residents. So it's always easy to start with concerns. So share with me some concerns that people have about development or community character or any of those things. Who wants to go first? Raise your hand. If you, down at the bottom of your screen says reaction. You can click on that little smiley face and there'll be a hand raise option, and then you can go there. So Frank found it first, so we'll go with Frank.
I'll jump in. I guess my basic concern is for retention of the marine character of the town and the waterfront, as well as the vistas of the town. I was talking to my one of my adult sons, and it had come to mind Paris, one of the most desirable cities for people to visit in the world, and the fact that it's has a limit of about 4 or 5 stories, so you can basically see the entire city from almost any point if you're on the top floor, and very walkable city with very good transport. So I think those things would be major concerns that I would have, is for the retention, again, of the sort of marine New England character, definitely along the waterfront, and green space, open space within the city confines, and making it very walkable.
Great, thanks, Frank. So Michael raised his hand next. Michael, for someone like you who has professional experience working with the zoning ordinance in the city, because these meetings are only an hour long, what I tend to find is that you give us high level thoughts and all that you think would be helpful for everyone to hear. But if you are willing to, sort of write down your thoughts and send it to Steve in the planning department so he can get it to us, so we can see every, that way you can say as much as you want to and not feel like you're confined to time. So
I understand that and appreciate it. Essentially, what I'm here tonight to do is to lobby for what are called form-based zoning code. There's the existing regulations are an accrued disaster of multiple applications, refining and revising the regulations, really out of context with the previous reforms. Frank Zullo was a friend of mine, was a wonderful attorney, but he bears a great responsibility for the mess that the existing regulations are. They're filled with contradictions, and a great deal of my neighbors, friends are all kind of frustrated by the type of development that's occurred over the last 25 years. Anyway, I will send Mr. Kleppen an essay on the benefits of form-based codes. They seem particularly appropriate for Norwalk, which is a city of diverse neighborhoods. Rowayton's different than Silvermine, which is different than East Norwalk, which is different than Cranberry, which is different than the center of town. And what form-based regulations do is allow a tailored approach to development, and would be very appropriate for all the environmental concerns that were raised earlier, but also provide opportunities for transit-oriented development, some more high density where we need it, address our affordable housing issues. So I urge all the attendees here to go on the web and find FBCI. It's the Form-Based Code Institute, and you'll get a quick introduction into how those codes work, why they're terrific. Town of Hamden adopted a form-based code, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. It's by far the most reasonable zoning code that I've worked with in the state of Connecticut. I've been in front of probably 30 different municipalities over the years, And, I think this is a great opportunity. And the last thing I'm going to say, and then I'll hang up or shut up, is don't be shy. Don't let precedent rule your decision-making when you design this new code. We need to trash the old regs and start from scratch and I think the best approach are form-based codes. Thank you.
Great. So you'll be encouraged to know that we are one of the few firms in the country that specializes in writing form-based codes. What we've learned though over the years is, the earliest form-based codes were created as a template that were much more high level and theoretical. But over the past 20 years or so of doing this, learned to understand one, what those original models were lacking from a regular zoning ordinance, conventional Euclidean-based zoning ordinance perspective, and so we've filled the gaps. And then the second thing is recognizing that the idea of the form of a place, we call it character. So when you hear me refer to character or character-based zoning, we just found that it's more easy for the average person to understand character other than form. We find that it's important to recognize that typically when you go to like Form-Based Code Institute webpage, for instance, if you all do, you'll see there's a big emphasis on creating, sort of walkable mixed-use environments, which are lovely and great. Everyone loves them. But the sort of the gap in the knowledge base tends to be when you're continuing on a pattern that isn't walkable, mixed use, kind of, lovely urbanism. And so really, with the exception of a very few form-based codes in the country that have been written purely form-based with this walkable mixed use character everywhere, they all tend to be a hybrid of some sort. And so recognizing that, for instance, what we might do along the corridors where it's very auto-oriented right now, suburban drive-throughs, all the stuff that's just like every other city in the country that has, yes, there may be a desire to transform that and have a better version of it. Can we ever go all the way to fully as walkable and lovely as, let's say, your downtown or some of your neighborhood centers? Maybe not, but it doesn't have to be as bad as it is. And so the way that we think about character is that everything has a character, from the most beloved parts of the city to the parts that no one really, wants to talk about. You don't take your friends there when they come to visit you, if you will. And so we have to look to the comprehensive plan, the citywide plan, to determine what areas you all have decided you want to transform and improve the character, and what areas you want to preserve and protect the character. And the way we write our zoning is to do those two things. And so I think you're going to be very pleased as we go through this. And even those who have no idea about form-based or character-based, I think will be pleased too, because as opposed to a conventional old school zoning approach, it's very easy for the average person to access and understand and make sense of. And so that'll be the thing that's the most probably exciting to the average person. And for those who are sort of in the design or business that understand form-based, you'll be excited too, because it'll have all the things you're looking for.
Sounds great. Last comment is that when it gets to the building standards part of your effort, I hope that it's more quality-based than style-based.
Spoken like a true architect.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, we tend to find that most places we work don't have the desire, well, maybe not the desire, but have the determination to regulate style. Even if we could do a visual preference survey of everyone in the city and everyone says we love these, 10 styles of architecture, and they are most representative of our community, most municipalities have a hard time wrapping their mind around that it's their place to regulate that. Some do, more so than others. So that'll be something we'll work through all together to determine what the right level of design regulation needs to be included. Because what we find is, and I'm sure you would agree, is that not all designers have the same skill set and backgrounds. And so we have to sort of cover the minimal basis from a design perspective to ensure that what comes out the other end is going to be good. And then beyond that, that's kind of where we all work together to determine what's appropriate.
Well, a lot of the communities in Fairfield County have architectural review boards. They're advisory, but they're very helpful. I think particularly to the zoning commissions, that they have a board that makes recommendations about the design, doesn't control it, but helps ensure quality. And maybe part of your effort is to think about creating in Norwalk an architectural review board that will assist the zoning commission in their review of submissions.
Great, thanks.
Brian, can I make one quick response to that? That's okay.
Please.
Sure. We're well aware of having the architectural review board. We've actually chosen to go a different route and then using an outside peer review architect, which I think works pretty well. Often a lot of communities I talk to and other folks find the architectural review board process itself a little more cumbersome and a little more time consuming, but I understand that a lot of communities do go that route.
My experience is that generally they're pretty professional, reasonable, and helpful. But they are another application. They are another meeting.
Yeah. It was interesting when we were working on not Port Chester that was just referenced, but we were working on Portsmouth, New Hampshire. We were doing form-based codes for them in their downtown and surrounding areas. And they, what we learned when we got there was the architectural review committee had more power than planning commission or city council. It was incredible. We've never seen such a thing. And so they took some of the subjectivity out of their discretionary process and created a set of actual written down standards. And then a lot of the standards also went into the zoning ordinance so that the submissions that they were getting were way better off in the first place. So it actually expedited the review process. It made them not just stay, till midnight having meetings and stuff. So.
And I want to add, excuse me for interrupting. This is Lynnell. I'm sorry, but I'm the one who knows and experienced what you guys did in Portsmouth. And the architectural review had a lot of say because they cared about that skyline right by the water, their whole out of, sight visual. But what you guys brought together was everybody understanding that this was education, transportation. You guys changed that city. And that's just one small example of, architecture is important, but Norwalk has a community college. We're between Yale and New York City. There's some amazing stuff even in our history. And I thank you guys because you guys know how to research and you did this. Thank you.
Appreciate it. We are not related, by the way. Lynnell.
No.
Lynnell. This is great. All right. Anybody else? Another concerned citizen. I remember, Robert, you said you were concerned. Do you have any specific concerns you want to share with us?
Just how it seems that, whatever board has been approving certain housing plans in the neighborhood, there's very little concern or restraint around how houses are, going almost right up to their property line, eliminating, grasslands that could absorb floodwaters, changing the character of the neighborhood, going stories above the, traditional and historical height lines of the neighborhood. I live in Rowayton, and it's really changed the character where we're getting walled in. What used to be very nice walkable areas of the neighborhood where you could see plenty of trees, you could see gaps in between the houses, you could see, through the houses, waterways and shorelines, that's very much going away. And my concern is, as development continues, how much is preserved versus what's erased of the character of neighborhoods. And then beyond that is making better allotments for walkability, bikeability, public transit, diversity and inclusion and equity overall.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, that's one of the things that I love so much about, how we write zoning ordinances, because, I don't think we've been to a place yet that people haven't said they're concerned about the character. Well, there's a few places that are really horrible that we've worked that wanted us to come turn it all around for them, but and they didn't care about the old character because there wasn't anything historic, there wasn't anything lovely about the place. But in most places we work, character of the neighborhoods in different areas of the city is really the primary concern that people have. And so, because we go out and we study, we measure in the field, you may have seen us out there with a rolling wheel in your neighborhoods and documenting the DNA of each of the areas around the city, trying to understand it to make sure that how we zone it isn't arbitrary and it's accurate. We know that several of your zoning districts right now, entire swaths of the city are essentially non-conforming. Like if something burned down or whatever, you couldn't build back what was there before because the zoning was sort of an abstract that was applied to the land in those areas. And so we're going to be working to clean that up and make sure that those kind of things don't continue to happen. We have been hearing something that has intrigued us, though, and I'll come back to that actually. So Lee just raised your actual hand. So
yeah, I couldn't find my virtual hand. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'd like to say a couple of things. You're talking about character of the neighborhood, and it seems like you were just talking about a certain amount of uniformity. I live in Silvermine, which is, most of it was built in the early 19th century with federal houses well before zoning ever existed. And part of our so-called character is the fact that many buildings are grandfathered in. So that's one point I'd like to make. Secondly, I have been concerned for a long time. We did a study a number of years ago on conservation developments, and people like Doug Hempstead and everybody were all involved in it. And I'm very embarrassed to say that we never fully got it written up. But one of the things that we found was when the developers inserted the word disturbed soil into the conservation developments, it meant that they could build more and that there was no longer any sponge, which, took care of excess water in flooding and things like that. So I would like to see that disturbed soil thing removed. One other thing I'd like to say, and this probably isn't zoning, but we are completely covered with double poles all over Silvermine at the moment because Eversource is putting in a bigger line to New Canaan. And apparently the town never negotiated taking out the second pole, which belongs nowadays to Frontier. And I understand in places like Easton, those double poles have been there for 5 years. So this is very unsightly for us. And we would like that sort of thing to be addressed by whomever's purview it is. Okay, that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I've been saying in these meetings and, trying to just see what happens when I say it. But I say you're have a very beautiful city with very ugly streets. And it's because of all the lines. And I've not been many places where I've been more struck by the number of overhead visual noise with all of those lines. And not only do you have, sort of the main lines, but you seem to have a line going to every house on the street, and maybe in sometimes every room to the house. It's shocking. And then furthermore, not only do you just have the visual clutter that creates, but you can't have street trees as a result of it. And so it's just horrible thing that happened to you. I understand though it's exorbitantly expensive to put them underground. I think that, maybe if more communities sort of works together, because I don't think it's the actual cost of putting them underground. I think it's sort of like hey, we don't want to put them underground, but if you want to, I guess you could, it'll cost this much. I feel like if there is a concerted effort to make it happen, and every time you tear up a street or a sidewalk or wherever you're doing any type of road improvement or construction, do it, move them, figure out how to raise the funds to do it, at least in a strategic way, because it has such a negative impact on the image of the city, and overall, just the walkability and the loveliness and even the environmental side of things as well, with the lack of the trees. So that's my encouragement that I'll be bringing to you all throughout the week. Dana. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Right. Could I just, many years ago, I was involved in the fight to get the lines underground, and we had a consultant who was actually in the business of putting things underground. And I think what we really learned was that Northeast Utilities, which I guess is Eversource these days, is an overhead transmission company, and they don't really have any desire to put things underground. And I don't know how we can change that, because what they use is the cost of putting them underground. And what they quote you is so exorbitant that it's almost unbelievable. So, we got one line underground in this fight, and it was town-wide, and that reduced the height of the poles that went through Silver Mine from between 40 and 60 feet. We looked at the poles in Bethel, they were 120 feet high, just to give you an idea of how incredible these people are on, the size of these things they put in. So anything you can do to get things underground and hidden and save our street trees, I'm 100% in favor of that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Dana.
Bravo.
Yes, I was just concerned about back to quality. Quality for buildings includes safety. I'm thinking about the condominium on Richards Avenue that became uninhabitable after a fire. Whether these are kind of fire traps, there was also a condos in Edgewater, New Jersey that burned twice. Are these structures, do they have the same safety regulations as other buildings for fire codes? It just seems like, are we building all these fire traps for people in town just to maximize profits?
Yeah, that's really a building code issue, not a zoning issue.
Okay.
Right, that's right. And they, I think it's probably safe to say that all the buildings that are built in the city have to meet the fire code. So that's depending which version of it is the city uses, but yes, they have to be built to code.
Oh, one other thing, tacking on to Lee's comments about underground utilities. When Old Witch Court was built in Rowayton, it was started from scratch. They did all underground utilities there. So if you're starting from scratch, it seems to be possible, or maybe the builder insisted on that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, in most places we work in the country, all new development has to have underground lines. It's not even a question. However, you all are pretty well built out comparatively. So when you do have new development, it's a very small scale. And so it's sometimes challenging, I think, for even for the developer to figure out not just how to pay for, but strategically how to put lines underground that are just a piece of the overall line system. So one thing that was mentioned a minute ago is the concern about some sort of uniformity in the approach that we're talking about. And I think once you become more familiar with the character-based approach, you'll start to see that, in fact, it's the opposite of uniform. Currently, your current zoning ordinance and most zoning ordinances in the country are focused on separating one use from the next. They have no care about the character at all. They're neutral to it at best, and they work pretty hard to have negative results when it comes to character. And so what you'll see is that we seek to make sure that the zoning that we write does represent the essence of not just Norwalk at large, but because there are many Norwalks, right? There are multiple different characters within the city. And so we seek to identify what those different characters are and to codify it. What you may be interested to note, though, is as somebody was sort of listing out this neighborhood is different than this, different than this, different than this. Some of your neighborhoods experientially feel different than one another, but in actuality, when you measure them, the metrics of them are very, very similar. So similar you wouldn't make them distinct zoning districts, one from the next. The differentiation I find, and Silvermine's a good example. No, not Silvermine. Another one of the neighborhoods that's sort of further out, has larger lots, larger houses, but you find there that the neighborhood I'm thinking of in particular, the topographic differences and the vegetative differences make it feel completely different than another neighborhood elsewhere in the city that on paper is the same. And so trying to understand from an outsider's perspective and kind of roaming around what that looks like. It's sort of good that we're not from there actually, because we don't have an understanding of the sort of mental map, if you will, of what is this and what is that area and what is that area. And so we can come at it from a really pure perspective. And when we study it, sort of scientifically, then we are able to see beyond those specific features that make it different. But then we have to understand, okay, well, if they are the same on paper, and if we zone these different areas the same, are those site-specific things like topography or vegetation enough to carry that character forward? Now, if vegetation is a feature, for instance, and you don't have a tree preservation ordinance in place, then that vegetation could be fleeting, right? And so you could not have all the trees around the houses that and you do in Silvermine have that are so beautiful. So looking at trying to understand those things, obviously the topography isn't something that would change much. However, I did see that you all have no problem blasting through these rocky hills and making a flat pad. So I guess you could technically change the topography as well. So we need to think through, slope and vegetation as well, setbacks and building types, et cetera. Let's see, we got Tamara.
Yes, thank you. The 2020 census has showed that Norwalk is developing into a 50% minority majority community. And this is a reflection of the changing demographics of the country. My question is, will the zoning review focus? Right now, it appears to be focusing on new development, which attracts a young professional community. Are you going to take into consideration the 52% minority majority population and how their needs are going to be addressed? My concern is whether your zoning review will look at whether areas that are multifamily housing will be rezoned for new apartment development.
Yes, so we will be looking at all of those things, because what we know is that all different types of people live in Norwalk, right? And so just like the character of any given area of the city isn't the same and you wouldn't want to have a one size fits all solution because you would homogenize the place. We want to make sure that we're understanding what the needs are of the community at every income level and age level and all of those different things that kind of there are a few different things in one's life that determine what type of housing you live in, right? And so understanding what those things are in Norwalk and making sure that we've addressed those and met those needs. Now, one of the things that we look at is, when we talk about workforce or affordable housing and understanding that you all have the opportunity to have inclusionary zoning in the city, because a lot of states we work in don't allow that. And so you all require a certain percentage of all new development to be within a certain price range. However, when you do those calculations, in most places we work, a lot of times people say, well, that's not actually very affordable for very many people, even though it's technically more affordable. So what we find is when we are increasing the supply of new housing, we are able to actually take people that are underhoused, because there's a lot of people in every city we work in that actually could afford more than they pay for what they live in. However, there aren't any options that are kind of in that next tier. You have to sort of jump up and skip the tier that's available for them. So they are left to sort of be in a price point bracket that isn't their natural bracket. So if we provide then other alternatives that are new, as you said, for them to kind of get into the price point where they can actually afford, then it starts to free up some of the units on the lower, more affordable side of things as well. So that's one benefit about thinking about new development. But the other thing is, it isn't just simply a price point thing that determines how people live and what types of ways they live there. It's also cultural, right? And so in some cultures, people tend to have the desire to be multi-generational within the same household. They don't have the ideal of, oh, as soon as I'm a certain age, I'm going to get out of here and see you, mom and dad, and okay, grandma, you're on your own. And so understanding that different cultures have different preferences. How do we accommodate that as well? I mean, one of the things that we heard when we first started talking to people was, well, what do we do about people who are they're cramming too many people into a structure? And so I say, well, is it, there was a safety concern. People said, this is a fire hazard or whatever the case may be. And so trying to understand, how much of that is a preference, a cultural preference versus a price point thing, like, just simply the more of us who are underneath this roof, the more we can, the easier we can afford it. And so we want to make sure that we don't prohibit people from doing things that are within their cultural customs to try to solve some problem that isn't actually what we think it is, right? So we're looking into all of those things, but I do know that some of the areas of concern that people have mentioned are when you have more people than you would expect living under one roof, then you have a multitude of cars. And so you can drive through certain areas of the city and you can see that there are cars parked all over the place. And so that, could be a concern from an emergency services perspective, if the vehicles can get through, et cetera. But at the end of the day, if we have, parking provisions that are, the parking is able to be put in a place where it was meant to be, or furthermore, if you are, starting to allow for people to, have the building and things be designed in a way that meets their cultural customs, then you're able to, have what had maybe initially been considered a challenge or a difficulty or something that was not desirable, and it can now become, part of what's lovely about the city. So. Can you unmute? Oh, Diane. I think Diane's next. Sorry, thank you.
Okay, sorry. All
That's
right,
okay.
well, Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having this particular focus tonight. I know you'll explain that if someone couldn't make it or they didn't feel like bringing something up, they could do so in your day-long charrettes, open or virtual charrettes, so that you can capture a lot of our fine thoughts and important thoughts. I just wanted to, I'm planning on speaking briefly tomorrow night when we're focusing on sustainability and green infrastructure, and many folks on the call that I've known for a long time. I hope you'll consider joining or putting in some info. I wanted to focus on a few quick things. The first is, as I have raised the issue before, I want to ensure that the, and I'm so pleased that Mr. Stein, I hope to reach out to you offline. I am in favor of form-based codes, and I still am not sure that what the company TPUDC is calling a character-based code is something that I think the public and I myself, I do some land use planning professionally and environmental planning. For me, and I know, I hope that I am wrong, but when I hear the phrase character-based code, land use codes or zoning codes, I am rereading some chapters of a book I love called The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. Only in that when our zoning code was put in place in Norwalk, there were clearly certain areas of town where you have single family homes and larger acreage. And the reason I'm mentioning that I'd like to make sure that we are more open-minded here is because many seniors that currently are in those single family homes, their children have left, they've maybe become a widow or widower. They still want to stay in the home, but they would like to have a little more legal income. And I know in the very near future, next week, I think the city's planning to have a discussion about accessory dwelling units. There's all different types, but I want to make sure that character-based zoning code isn't code, so to speak, for keeping things as they are in our more spacious areas of town. And I live in Cranberry, where you have lots of acreage, lots of woods, and I'm not saying they should all be overrun with apartment buildings like what we've seen on Glover Avenue, but I do think there should be, with controls, with regulation, the ability for especially someone who's a senior who has the space and can prove they have, if it's on septic or on well, they have the ability, the facilities to have one or two people living in a tiny home, or AARP has a great free group of flyers about accessory dwelling units because of their constituency, because people are having to sell the homes and move into a nursing home because they can't afford to keep up their home. So I just want to make sure we're being open-minded. Secondly, I don't want to see anyone think that segregated zoning codes from yesteryear, even in Norwalk, would be continuing. I do think we need to have controls on these ADUs or accessory dwelling units, but also discuss how and where we want to allow for expansion of homes outside of public transportation corridors. So I think there is a plan to encourage ADUs where there's trains and public transportation, but I think they should also be allowed outside of the core of Norwalk, as long as there's the proper controls where someone couldn't have 5 cars, they would have 1 car, or maybe 2 at most, as long as the driveway could handle it. I think we need to make sure that that is allowed in every other neighborhood. And lastly, I think a lot of this could be handled with better buffers. We have to include buffering of our neighborhoods especially when they abut commercial and industrial zones and uses of buildings, malls, you name it. And we want real buffers, and we want them to be wider, and that is a zoning issue. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to protect our residential neighborhoods with a laser-like focus on increasing buffers, even in the existing neighborhoods. By adding trees, it'll help both the environment, the temperature, shading, it'll help noise control. And I'd love to see us with our very distinctive and wonderful neighborhoods. Let's make a point of, as they're modifying the properties or subdividing, that there has to be wider and better and greener buffers. Lastly, as far as what do we want Norwalk to look like as far as character and development, I just have two last things. And the first is, a lot of us that have been in Norwalk, I've been there for 35 years plus, we don't want to see more big box development. Now, depend upon who the mayor was back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, we had a lot of condos everywhere, built into the sides of hills, which would never be allowed anymore. But then there was the era of the big box. Look at Connecticut Avenue. I'm hoping some of those big boxes will be turned into residential development soon, sooner rather than later. It might be interesting, but we don't want to see more big boxes as the go-to when creative and searching for other better uses, like we have up on the what is known as the BJ's wholesale site. We hope it doesn't become a BJ's. We're hearing it'll be a ShopRite, which is another big box, but on Main Avenue in Norwalk near Perry Ave. We can do better than that. Let's be creative. And lastly, the Webster Street lot. Tomorrow we're talking about green infrastructure, and I will address it then. But right now, I've been told that that is the penultimate green infrastructure project in Norwalk. And I know I think Jessica Vonishek is on this call, and I'm happy about that, but you're new to our town. The Webster Street lot years ago was supposed to be examined for its possibility of being a wonderful mixed-use development where we would cover over that parking lot. We'd still have the same amount of parking on the bottom, but we'd have buildings on top of it that are both residential, and we'd have some mixed use on the first floor, and it would all be walkable, bikeable. It'll be near public transportation. So I just ask if there's a way to cancel the current plans to put pervious surfacing on that parking lot and instead go back to the drawing board and do green infrastructure elsewhere and use that site. We're so lucky to have it. Let's do what others talked about over the years and look at it as a zone for residential and mixed use. So thank you very much for allowing us to speak.
Yeah, so just to clarify, it's so interesting when we work in places where people have an interest in zoning and planning and have, read and have, learned and researched things, how the fine points and the nuance of the discussion comes to bear more than in other places we work. So just to put your fears to rest, Diane, we literally, let's see, the most predominant, most prevalent form-based code template in the country is called the SMART code. And the SMART code was a template that was created to help spread and disseminate the form-based zoning concept to places that had typical use-based zoning. So my father, Bill Wright, who is on the team with us, is the co-author of the SMART code and manual of this most widely used form-based code, and I'm a contributor. We literally just found that over the years, people were like, what do you mean form? Like, do I have to fill out a form before I can do development? And so we just started, we came about calling it character. So it is the same. But like I said, there is, it's up to the community to decide what is that character. There are places that people will want to preserve. Typically, there are places that people will want to transform, typically. And then there are places that are kind of in between. And so when Robert was speaking earlier, I said I had a question that I was going to ask, and then I'll wait till the next person spoke. But the question that I was going to ask is, you all, so far, we've heard from many people who live in what we would call established single-family detached neighborhoods that have been asking for the ability to start to include some additional low-scale density within the neighborhoods. We've heard it time and again. And so what I was going to ask is, of this group, and I'm starting to kind of test it out with each group, is that really the consensus of the community? Because it's normally people who live in those neighborhoods who are the most concerned about zoning changes. And so we just want to double check. It's easy for us to do it. We know how to write the zoning in a way that will allow it, make it easy, not change the feeling of the character of the neighborhood necessarily, unless you all want to do that, but to allow some densification while keeping that same general feeling and character in place. And so I've been seeing thumbs ups popping up around here. Does anybody have an objection to that idea of adding some accessory dwelling units, or allowing people to take their single house, and instead of moving out and selling it and downsizing, converting it into a duplex? Or you just see time and again in cities over the years, a large single family house could become multiple apartments, or whatever the case may be. Do I have anybody who's concerned about that? And please don't be afraid to say you are, because it's okay if that's not. But I just
Brian, can I jump in quick? I just wanted to clarify a couple things. I'm starting to fade to darkness here, it looks like. So Norwalk already does allow accessory dwelling units in all the single family zones. They don't allow detached units as of yet. That's under discussion, and as a couple people alluded to, next week we are having a meeting where we will be discussing that. But you can do that right now in any single family dwelling. Our regulations also permit you to have 3 unrelated individuals in your house, and that mimics what's in state statute. So our regulations do follow that. And I hope everybody saw Jessica's message in the chat about the Webster Street lot, where the redevelopment agency did issue an RFQ for redevelopment of that site. And we're well aware that that's just a big waste of land, just being a parking lot in the prime center of downtown. So we all are very well aware of that. Just to point out a couple of things. Thanks.
Yes, and to add to what Steve just said, it is our understanding, as he just verified, that you are able to do accessory dwelling units in all the single family neighborhoods. But when I have said that to people, they say, yeah, but it's not that easy. There's these restrictions that make it where it's not super feasible, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to be looking into that and try to make sure it's as easy and straightforward as possible moving forward. But I will assume that if anybody did have any strong objection to starting to densify some of these established neighborhoods, that their hand would have popped up. So I'll start calling on hands there. So I've got Lynn first. If you could unmute.
Lynn Pratt.
Yeah, okay, frustrating.
There you go.
I just, an observation I've had that ever since we've, one of the prime character changes that we've observed in coastal dwellings here is the requirement now that if any changes are going to be made to a house, more than 50% of the value, that the building has to be raised to new standards, FEMA standards. And that has really impacted what we feel living along the coast. And I just wonder why zoning didn't address this as a total impact. In some cases, it's limited to three stories. Well, you get 3 stories on top of another story, and you got 4 stories. And at times I just feel I can't breathe. It just feels so impactful. And we're getting these walled parking units that are facing the street, and before they were more artfully done, and now they're not able to be. So I wish that had been, I don't know if it can be, probably not, but I think that would be beneficial if that could be looked at. The other concern I had was that I listened to the first meeting on YouTube, and Brian Baker made a comment along the access to river, the 5 Mile River, and he referenced some kind of requirement that it had to that homeowners, landowners, as business owners have to provide access, public access to the riverside of their buildings. In many cases, I've noticed that this has been ignored and abused in some cases. And I wonder how that can be enforced.
Thank you. So to your first point about the raising the buildings when they're substantially improved, we've heard several people have concerns about that. It tends to be the people who live in those areas who will have to raise their house if they make improvements, or if they want to sell it, the next person, if they want to do something, will have to raise it. I think that the short answer to that is that's the point of the regulations. I think that's the intended outcome is being achieved. That there was a decision made, a commitment to not building in the floodplain in a risky way, and so for those homes that are there, the strategy is for them to be raised out of harm's way. So and I think that that decision was made long ago. So I think that
I'm aware of that.
Yes, yeah, I was just literally responding to you, Lynn. Thank you. But we've heard several people, so I thought it was worth saying. One of the concerns that I have as an outsider and as a person who is about the character in the place, when you, and I think this is kind of where you were going to in some ways, Lynn, when you raise those buildings, it has an impact on the character. And if you have to raise them a lot, there are plenty of places that are in flood prone areas that are historic, and the houses were built up because they knew better, and that's just what it is. And they have these great high porches or stoops or whatever the case may be, and crawl spaces and undercrofts, and it's just part of that character. It's lovely. But what I'm seeing there is that you all are elevating buildings and you're putting parking on the ground floor. And as a pedestrian or a motorist or a cyclist or going down the street, you just see right into underneath the building. It's a sort of horrible, sort of visual experience. And so trying to think about ways that the parking needs that are being met with this strategy can be accomplished, as well as if it's being caused as a result of raising the buildings out of the floodway, then how do we come up with a strategy that still allows you to have a nice looking streetscape? Because right now it's been it's totally not happening in some of the new buildings we've seen. So that's one thing that we're interested in learning more about. Brian, do you want to add anything to what Lynn was referring to in your last discussion on this?
Sure. So it's, a lot of those properties along Relocating Avenue are, existing prior, they've been there for a long time. So they're not subject to having to provide any sort of walkway along Relocating 5 Mile River. But as projects or as sites are redeveloped, as long as they're not for single or 2 family houses, so any sort of commercial or multifamily uses, they have to provide a public walkway along the 5 Mile River, and in hopes of that one day it will connect all the way down. And those are supposed to be publicly accessible. They're deed restricted so that they have to be, and they have to provide a public walkway to get to that, to get to the river.
Unfortunately, I think maybe, I'm not sure if this is correct or not, but it's my impression that so many of the buildings that are along the waterways are those single houses, single family homes. And so in order to create that over time, it's going to be a challenge. And also because you all are protective of your waterfront industry. A lot of that of your waterfront is given to industry, and there doesn't seem to be a strong desire to change that. And in some places, in some ways, it's part of what makes you guys neat. You're like a real place, a complete community. You have even industry and all that. Unfortunately, it happens to be in some of your most interesting and scenic areas. So over time, I think having these strategies like Brian just talked about in place will get you where you want to be, but it takes a while for sure. So Robert.
I just have a quick follow-up question. What
Sure.
what year did that take place? But what, we're looking at new construction as far back as when?
I could look into that for you. Give me 1 second and I'll get back to you.
Okay.
Thanks. In the meantime, Robert, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I just wanted to say my earlier comment about the changes in the character of Rowayton due to new construction and houses being raised wasn't in any way to object to seniors revising their homes to either be multi-generational or get additional income from possible renters or anything like that. It was really just more that these houses are taking up so much of their property that there's like a great reduction in land that could absorb floodwaters, as well as just an overall changing of what people came to Rowayton and other parts of Norwalk for. Is that it's a remarkable, noticeable change in the almost the skyline of the town. And so that was more my concern, and I'm completely open to other uses of people's homes. Just this is families where they have it's four-member families, and they're making massive 3-4 story houses that are blocking up a lot of the skyline. So.
Okay, thank you. Heather.
Sorry, hi. I think that, and this is just nothing that I've spoken to a lot of people about, unlike some other areas. I feel like the accessory apartments, like I have a legal in-law apartment in my house. Up in Silvermine, we have very small homes relatively, and we do push back, against a lot of the 4,000, 5,000 square foot homes, infill as we like to call it. But I think the issue in Norwalk is more enforcement. So it's not so much the opposition to the accessory apartments, it's the opposition to more satellites on roofs and a lot of more cars and parking driveways, because we don't have a lot of, especially up along the river, we don't have a lot of space for that kind of stuff. So until the enforcement in the city becomes more manageable, I think that that's not a great idea personally, unless that's built into whatever you're doing. We don't have enforcement officials to do that, and things like noise ordinances, we don't have police that are actively enforcing it. So that's our concerns, is how that happens.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, certainly enforcement is, when we write zoning, it assumes enforcement would follow the zoning, but we know every place we work, there are always concerns about enforcement of the existing ordinance. So you would hope that in the midst of a process like this, that those things will get sorted out, the enforcement side will get sorted out as a part of it, but it's certainly out of our scope. But important, because we have city officials here that hear your perspective, and so.
And my perspective comes from, as I guess people know, I'm the supervisor for the Red Cross disaster response recovery. And there are so many homes, even in Norwalk, where there are multi families and 2-family units that do not have to, have anybody come in and look at them. And there's a lot of homes that do not have, a second egress and things like that. So how do we get those up to compliance first before we start looking at additional accessory apartments and stuff?
Yeah, well, and also, go ahead.
No, just safety is a huge issue,
The other thing that I thought was interesting was, to your point about maybe some of the parking considerations or other things. I mean, right now in Rowayton, you have so many of these, what's unusual to us, to see these privatized streets that are sort of half blocked off and things, and it's great, sort of a pedestrian prioritized area. I think that's really wonderful. And I think maybe that's partly, because so to me, that says people are really paying attention to what's going on over here. And that's partly why I'm so intrigued by the fact that I keep hearing about the openness to doing some of these things. There's clearly a protective, ethos there and other neighborhoods too. It just so happens that that's where a lot of the private streets are that I noticed. And so I think one of the questions that I would ask always as we're looking at densification is, are there, does transit run through there? Do you have the ability, if you don't have a car, to hop on a bus or to walk somewhere where you could hop on a bus? And so if you don't, then that means unless you're sharing a car with the primary owner of the home, then you would probably have to have your own car there to be able to survive in Norwalk. And so that may be, so is it impossible for transit to run through there, or it just doesn't currently?
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, we just had changes with school. We no longer have a neighborhood school, so we have a lot of buses coming through. But it's a lot of the old, like we have footpaths and things like that, and the roads are very narrow, which is lovely, and people like to walk, and it's a great bike walk area. Um, but it's not safe for that. I think the closest is Broad River, if you know where that is. But that's another place where there's cars parked all along the road. So if somebody were to come out, trying to walk, it's not great. So.
Yeah. All right, Frank. Can you unmute?
Okay, I'm unmuted. Yes, I'd like to address what Brian addressed in terms of the walk along the river. But I think it applies to the 5 Mile River. It applies to the waterfront down off of Water Street, as well as down in the boatyards that will probably someday be developed down at by Calf Pasture. And that is that there's a particular building right now that is a condo that's being put up that blocks a river view, but will give a walkway for 100 feet that may be connected within the next 50 or 100 years to other buildings along the river that will allow people to walk along the river. But what we've given up is a view of the river that was there because the building was sited in such a way that it blocked the river view that existed at the end of a main street in Rowayton. So, and why it was placed there and not on the original footprint of the building that was taken down, I don't really know. But the result is that it blocks a very nice river view that existed for at least 50 years or more. And it had to do with the siting on the property. And looking forward to possibly whatever 25, 50, 100 years to complete the river walk, I'm sure will not satisfy me in my lifetime. So I think the zoning should really take a very hard look at how it impacts the visual vista of the community and the town, and not just does it meet code and provide some potential aspect for the future to the community.
Yes, that's a good point, Frank. One of the things we learned in our work in Portsmouth is this concern about having a limited number of opportunities within the city to view the water, and how nearly impossible it is to unring the bell when you've lost one. And so the exercise that we typically will do is to go through and have community members identify for us where those water vistas are, that we then we can start to see, once we understand where they are there strategies, strategic concepts we can incorporate into the zoning to preserve those without, taking the development rights of parcels that are in the trajectory of those views. So if any of you happen to have an interest in doing that, if you just would take a map of the city and mark any that you know and send them in, that'll be super helpful for us. Because some of them, obviously we can look at a map as well, but sometimes it's a little bit nuanced. Only a local going, oh yeah, but there's this one, like when you're over here in this one spot and it's, you happen to be, you're standing at that angle or whatever. So if anybody wants to help us out with that, that'd be great. All right, Scott. Yeah, can you unmute?
There we go. Sorry about that. For whatever reason, my computer did not want to unmute. Hey, you just made me think about something related to the waterfront, and specifically what I was thinking about is it amazes me that so much of Norwalk's riverfront is basically what I'll call, necessary, but not necessarily attractive businesses. So you've got King Industries, you've got the transfer station for hard waste, you've got the transfer station for lawn clippings and yard waste. You have the water treatment plant, which is actually super necessary. But I guess I was just thinking, as part of this zoning or as part of these other activities that we're taking on, is there any consideration for, are there other uses are there other places where we could relocate those facilities or facilities like them so that we actually could take advantage of the riverfront, over a much larger area and sort of reclaim that for the people versus city services. So,
Can I respond to that, Brian?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, you may be aware that we are doing an industrial zone study right now that's just about wrapped up. And we've started working on the waterfront portion of that. We kind of split them into two pieces. So as part of that effort, we've actually talked to almost every property owner, and I'm talking about the Norwalk Harbor specifically, all the commercial property owners along Water Street and in the Upper Harbor with some of those lake locations you mentioned. So we have a good understanding of their businesses, what they think is going to happen in the future, what they'd like to do, their problems, those things. And we understand that there's a strong desire for people to have access to the water. And one of the recommendations that it's actually started in the East Norwalk TOD plan was potentially looking at relocating the DPW garage. Where that would go, that's another step in another process, but we understand that maybe that's not the long-term best use of that property, and maybe that's something that could get repurposed for a greater public good along those lines. So we are very cognizant of those things and trying to balance the job retention and job growth potential for the waterfront, but also getting people to the water and making that a better amenity for everyone in the city. So it's a very tricky balancing act, but we're trying to come up with the best strategy to achieve that.
Thank you.
All right, I think everybody's lost their steam. They're ready for dinner. So I see no other hands up. Thank you all so much for your time this evening. And for those who are participating in this afternoon or this morning, I appreciate that as well. We will be back tomorrow, 6 p.m. to talk about
sustainability and green infrastructure.
There you
we
go.
know it's a big topic in Norwalk, so
yes, so lots to discuss in that regard. So please let people know if they aren't aware that this is going on this week. The more the merrier. And I'm glad to hear that people have been saying that they missed a session, but they listened to it or watched it on the webpage. So that's great. That means the process is working. But we will